So we'll go backwards. You just heard me, and then now you'll hear, we'll start with Joan Martinet-Allier. Well, we're not going in historical order, so it should be John Gowdy and then Joan. Okay. Backwards. Backwards.
Oh, we're starting. Now we're starting.
Juan's first, and then John, and then me.
Okay, all right. Here we go. So the inspiration for this was that I was giving this presidential address, and we had, we realized that we had so many of our past presidents here, and we thought that this would be a great idea to see. It's both the history of how ecological economics has evolved and the kinds of challenges that it has faced, how the institution has evolved, and how all of them in different ways have engaged with the subject and what they see as the challenges today. So we'll begin with Joan Martinet-Allier, who is with the Autonomous University of Barcelona in Spain. I don't need to say much about him. You all know him from a very long time. And he was president in 2006 and 2007. As you know, in ISEE, you are president-elect for 2 years, and then you're president for 2 years, and then you're past president for 2 years. So the 2 years I'm mentioning are when you're actually president. And those are the 2 years, 2006 and 2007. So what, 10 minutes each, and then we'll have questions, and I'll just go down the line.
Well, I'll go quickly because I wanted to present some of my views using this occasion, so I'll speak 10 minutes. I know many of you. I've seen Philip Fernside there at the distance. And I think Bob Costanza is coming in a taxi, isn't it? But
it depends on where he's coming from.
So we should be sure to give him time if he arrives on time. So many of us know each other since the 80s, if not, the 80s. And there were meetings in Stockholm, then Barcelona, in Warsaw also. This has been explained many times how the society arose. But we are like the sons or grandsons, perhaps, of the older generation of Kenneth Boulding, Georgescu Reagan. Herman Daly is not that old. He's very much alive, fortunately. But he started to write already in the 60s. In 68, he published his first article in the Journal of Political Economy about a biophysical view of the economy. So I think that people like Herman Daly, Bob Ayers, they should get Nobel Prizes in economics because they started in the 60s. They did pioneering work, which is still not only relevant, more and more relevant. So when you do something like this, you should get a Nobel Prize in economics. Let's hope this will happen. Apart from this, I want to now to say what I think about what is going on here and in ecological economics. So there is a lot of discussion on when people talk about valuation, it makes me nervous that they assume that we mean economic valuation. This is not the case. There are many different values, and ecological economics has always emphasized, as John Gowdy would agree. And of course, we have different positions and different lines. And Charles Perrings would be perhaps an ex-president thinking along different lines than myself, perhaps. But I'm going to give, of course, my own view about this. So I asked this: who has the power to simplify complexity and impose monetary valuation? How do people assume they have this kind of power? And I was in the advisory board of TIP, and I have noticed a couple of very conspicuous silences. As in the last 3 or 4 years, TIP was developing the Nijamgiri Hill in Orissa, in India, where Pavan Sukhdev comes from India. This was not mentioned in any of the reports of TIP, and neither was mentioned the Yasuni ITT initiative in Ecuador, which is such an interesting attempt. So TIP has its shortcomings because of an excessive emphasis on monetary valuation, with perhaps the best of intentions to make things more visible. You want to put money valuation. I have noticed that Bina Agarwal just now, she talked about institutions, she talked about technology, and this was a very good lecture on ecological economics, and the word dollars or rupees did not appear in the lecture, isn't it? Not because it could not, but it did not. So, in fact, as has been mentioned, we are moving not towards a green economy, we're moving away from a green economy. But nevertheless, because the indicators show this, that we're moving more climate change or more CO2 in the atmosphere, but there is perhaps a new awareness that we depend not only on the flows from the funds, but also on exhaustible stocks. And even, I put here, even FAO will perhaps realize soon that modern agriculture is more energy efficient, as Pimentel already explained in 1973, one of the founders of ecological economics. And Via Campesina is right when it claims that peasant agriculture cools down the earth. This does not happen here, does not happen perhaps in Rio Centro, it happens in what is called la cúpula or la cópula dos povos, la cúpula dos povos, here, not very far from here. This is what Via Campesina is. So we depend on exhaustible stocks, and we have learned how to do accounts of material flows. The next president after Professor Bina Garbal will be Marina Fischer-Kowalski. She's the president-elect, and she is well known because of this kind of work. And this is useful to link the study of social metabolism to the study of the growing number of environmental conflicts. And here I have some pictures from getting into Brazil from Peru. Everything has been paved, everything has been deforested, oh, not everything, quite a lot, isn't it? And this is very near where Chico Mendes lost his life in 1988 in Chapuri. This is a place for ecotourists. This is myself from the back as an ecotourist looking at where Chico Mendes lived. So, I mean, he died for nothing? No, this is not true. He died for the reservas extractivistas, isn't it? And, well, but there are so many people killed defending the environment. There is a lot of pressure on biodiversity, so we should place more attention on the driving forces than not on the so-called market failures. But this is my view. I mean, you'll hear other views from other people in this conference. And we also, as a good sign, I think, we have these new debates, as we heard today in the morning from Peter Victor, who was very subdued, but his book is not subdued at all. His book is called Managing Without Growth. And Tim Jackson's book is called Prosperity Without Growth, isn't it? This is new. It's not new because it comes from the 70s and from the Meadow Report. And even there was a president of the European Commission, Siko Manskol, who lasted only for 6 months, who said that he agreed to, as he put it, below zero growth, but this is more popular. And we have learned also, as Frederick Soddy already did in the 1920s, to see the 3 levels of the economy. What is distinctive about ecological economics is not that we criticize the financial level and that we know about the so-called productive economy, as we heard just now, but also that we focus on what I call the real economy of energy, materials, and production of waste, isn't it? The physical, the biophysical economy. And what we see is that some companies, they grow, and so if they are banks, they might have toxic assets, but what they all have, especially those in the productive economy, many of them, they have toxic debts, isn't it? They have environmental liabilities, and it's very difficult to get compensation or to get recognition of these liabilities. So externalities are not internalized. We are in an economy of cost shifting, as Carl Wilhelm Kapp, one of our precursors, he's like a grandfather also of ecological economics, said already in the 1950s. Externalities are not so much market failures as cost-shifting successes between inverted commas, isn't it? So I'm about to finish So we have in the economy now, right now in Europe, in Spain, financial crisis. I don't know what happened in Greece today with the elections. But two kind of schools. Keynesians, which are, well, in a way, our friends, more than the other ones, including the green Keynesians, like Achim Steiner or Pavan Sukhdev, or the green economy here in Rio that UN is trying to push so much, isn't it? Let's have investments, but these should be green investments. We also have other people who I call the debtocracy. I don't know where you have seen an excellent Greek film documentary in the web, and they call them the debtocracy, the financial sector. The debts have grown. The biggest debt, as you know, is the US, the United States debt, or Japanese debt, and they want to collect the debt. Therefore, when it's growth, but this growth is not real growth. This growth is a growth which we know has a large amount of destruction. So this is the dilemma. The real economy is the important economy, or should not be forgotten at all. And this is what we have emphasized in ecological economics. But if we grow, what will happen to the oil price or the supplies of oil, to carbon dioxide, to biodiversity? Because you have to notice, as you know, that even a non-growing industrial economy, as Peter Victor's or Tim Jackson or Herman Daly's steady state, a non-growing industrial economy does not guarantee sustainability, because energy from fossil fuels is not recycled, isn't it? So we need, the companies go all the time to the commodity frontiers. And in the commodity frontiers, what we find are spectacles like this one of people mourning people who have been dead. Here I put something in honor of our president about the Indian social metabolism, but it's not because of her, in honor of Bina Garbal, but because India is such an important actor in the world economy. So they are now at about 5 tons. Of course, this is an average, which we should not use averages. 5 tons of tons per person per year altogether. In Europe, we are at 15 tons. In Spain, in the building boom, we went up to 20 tons of useless investments. So what we think about the world, how much are we going to increase the material flows, and therefore how much are we going to increase the conflicts? So what we have to do is to be optimistic. One good sign, I think, is that peak population is approaching. And there is an old discussion. Here I have just one picture to put my own take and ideas about this. This woman is complaining against priests and judges and all of them male. This is 100 years ago. We also have to be optimistic, because in the north there is a movement, intellectual movement, to decroissance perhaps, or at least to steady state, prosperity without growth. Tim Jackson goes around the world. He's an old friend of all of us, and he gets 500,000 people in the audiences. And so this is a good sign, I think, from the north. But then from the south, what we have is a strong growth of not just historical events like Chipko, more and more movements of environmental justice, and many more conflicts. So UNEP should do, instead of talking so much perhaps about the green economy, to collect environmental conflicts, do statistics of environmental conflicts, such as this one at the Chinese embassy in Quito a few weeks ago. This is new, isn't it? So I'm finished in 2 minutes. Or in India, isn't it? So we should be realistic, not despair, be optimistic because of this environmental justice movement. Instead, what we see is UN rhetoric. I am taking sort of the extreme left or left green, I don't know, point of view here to have a variety. But I really believe that this is what is going on here. And many people are a bit angry at what is going on here. So every 20 years they change the slogan. After in Rio plus 80 they will need a new public relations advice, isn't it? Because meanwhile what we see is fact, many of these conflicts going on this week 1-2 people are going to be killed in the world. It's true, it's like this because of environmental conflicts, not in Barcelona for instance, and not in the north of the planet, but in many other places. And from the south we get new ideas. So we get ideas that living, when Nimo Bassi comes here in tomorrow, isn't it? Nimo Bassi is likely, this is like a trailer on what Nimo Bassi is going to say tomorrow, most probably. So claims for the ecological debt, this thing, not talk so much about growth or even development, uniform development, but living well, sumac causae, as they say in Ecuador, in Bolivia, and all these ideas. These ideas coming from the south, and ecological economy, economists and economics should be more open to this. And from the north we have these ideas. So it's not that we are preaching degrowth in India. This would be totally absurd and counterproductive and unjust and absurd. Is that from the north there is a new debate coming from the last 40-50 years, and now I think more stronger and stronger. We even have this conference on degrowth and publications, including in the journal Ecological Economics, a couple of special issues coming up on degrowth and steady state. And this is the last one. This what makes me optimistic is that this potential alliance of southern environmental justice organizations with this debate in the north in the last 40 years and even now stronger on the steady state, on degrowth and then steady state and so on, which is at the roots of ecological economics, from Kenneth Boulding, from Georgescu Reagan, who used the word décroissance, Georgescu Reagan, in a book published in France in 1979. So this is our roots, or part of our roots as ecological economists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, how about that? That's better. Okay, Joanne and I were both heavily influenced by Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen, so I think I'm going to continue in the negative tradition he set up here. So I have a question really going to start with, why haven't we made more of a difference? You know, we meaning the social justice community, the environmental community, not just ecological economics. Georgescu would ask, why haven't we made any difference? But I'll soften it a little bit. But income disparity continues to increase, I think, in almost every country in the world. Biodiversity loss continues. As someone mentioned this afternoon, there's also a loss of cultural diversity. One estimate is that we lose one human language every 2 weeks, which means, of course, whole cultures are being lost to this sort of growing world system. Climate change is maybe the most alarming thing that's happened, and it's actually a very incredible thing. And most of the damage to the atmosphere in terms of increasing levels of CO2 has happened within my lifetime since 1950 or so. It's gone up from around 300 parts per million to almost 400 parts per million, and this is unprecedented. In the last 1 million years, probably 3 million years, it fluctuated in a very small range. I mean, just overnight this has happened. And evolutionary biology, they make a distinction between proximate and ultimate causes, and that's what I sort of want to give these brief comments about. A proximate cause, might ask the question, why do flowers bloom in the spring, at least in the north? The proximate cause is the temperature gets warmer, the days are longer, and the flowers take advantage of the sunlight. But the ultimate cause is you have these kinds of plants that have evolved over tens of millions of years to adapt to biophysical conditions, and they're part of an ecosystem. They fit into this pattern and process and so on. In terms of economics, okay, why do we use too much fossil fuels? The proximate cause is that prices are too low, and we raise the prices, which is, I know that's what a lot of you are working on, pricing, biodiversity, and so on. I'm not saying that's not important, but it's not, answering those kinds of questions aren't going to do the job. We need to really look at ultimate causes. We're in the predicament we are because we've evolved this socio-economic system over the last several thousand years, dedicated to the goal of maximizing agricultural output and economic output, and now God knows what, financial output. But we have to look at this thing as sort of an interlocking, self-reinforcing system. It's like, and it probably came through something called multi-level selection. Human cultures have been selected that best do this process and are able to outcompete others. Competition is not always good, and evolutionary outcomes are not always good. And just because something is natural doesn't mean it's a good thing to happen. So anyway, the ultimate cause why we use too much fossil fuels is sort of this tradition of maximization, expansionary empires that have taken over, and accelerated again a couple of hundred years ago with the fossil fuel revolution and market economies be able to tap into this source and so on. So what I think there are two lessons we can learn from this. I mean, the system is like an evolved, again, self-organized system, like an interlocking jigsaw puzzle, and that's why it's so hard to change. You can't just change one thing because all the pieces fit together. And a steady state economy, you can't just, in my opinion, stop economic growth without looking at the underlying mechanisms that propel growth. What's the underlying economic logic? The self-reinforcing, positive reinforcing aspect. The other thing is it's an evolutionary system, and evolution can't look ahead. Human societies since agriculture, one after another, have overshot and collapsed, and gone on to do something else, reorganize in a certain area. So evolution, again, it's not necessarily a positive force. And it can't look ahead. Climate change has not yet started to really affect the economy, yet we probably locked ourselves into some very serious consequences over the rest of this century. So again, it may be too late to prevent catastrophic change looking at this system. So anyway, my plea to especially the younger people in the audience is to sort of step back, and if we really are to influence policy to sort of change direction of this ocean liner that's possibly headed over a dam, we need to go back and look at some fundamental questions. What propels economic growth? What causes this thing? And if the better we understand it, the better we are able to maybe change it.
Thank you.
I asked Mina to be last, even though it's not the order, right? But then I realized I'm in the middle, and then I said there's a reason for that, because I'm still hanging on here as being past something or other associated with ISEE. So this is my last hurrah. Okay, so I get to be the last to say the last word again, right? But I also wanted to recall that Bob Costanza is here somewhere in Rio de Janeiro, but we also don't have with us some of our other past presidents who are very important and influential in everything we've done forever. So I just wanted to recall Nick Norgard, John Proops, and Charles Perrings, who are also our past presidents, who were not able to come to Rio on this occasion, but did send regrets, and would certainly have liked to have been here with you all. So I'm just going to make a very short remarks here. I hope Bob does make it before we finish, but if not, we will have him later on. I want to talk a little bit about emerging market societies and green economy idea as promoted by by Rio Plus 20 and UNEP. And we're going to have a panel very specifically focused on the role of emerging markets in the proposed paradigm for a green economy, and the relevance of such a shift in at least in language as to how to refer to sustainable development for developments in the global south. And this the Green Economy Initiative, as it's being promoted initially by UNEP, which seems to be where everybody takes the punching bag, to blame somebody. We have to blame somebody for this movement. UNEP came up with this notion and put Pavan Sukhdev to work spreading the idea around, as well as TEEB. So green economy became a central focus of the discussion that led to Rio Plus 20. So if we're going to make statements or make some kind of contribution, as the objective of this conference is to do, we kind of have to refer to that in some way and relate it to our own perspectives and theoretical constructs. So I'm going to try to do a little bit, and not necessarily nowhere near as much as Juan and John have done, but just to try to pull it together and try to make it relevant to Brazil, my adapted country, and other countries in the South. So we look at the green economy as being a fairly pragmatic effort, in which instruments and technologies are going to be put to play to try to change what João has also mentioned as being the real economy, as it's being called today, towards sustainable development. And of course, as Glenn Marie Lang and Peter Victor have shown us this morning, it may not be that the real economy needs to be transitioned that way, but there are really actually other more ephemeral and speculative economies that are at play based on financial derivatives, for example, that were really the source of much of the destruction that has occurred, that Juan has referred to as having brought home very clearly that these cycles of boom and bust and make and break are just a very intrinsic part of the contradictions that make up the modern real economy, and plus its ephemeral, speculative, financial aspects. So, and that includes the carbon market. We all we're really hot to get into the carbon market, but the carbon market is a financial derivative of an ephemeral idea based on what Polanyi would describe as a fictitious good. Carbon is a fictitious reduction in emissions as a good that can be traded. Is a very conceptual idea. It's certainly interesting, and it's interesting that it has become the largest commodity in the trading commodity market in the world over the last 4 years. So this is certainly one of the aspects of the intangibles that have not been well treated in the current model that is focused on growth. And I think that what we can say in terms of making position on this issue is that the objective of the green economy, as it's been formulated so far, but all the documents that I've seen on it anyway, seems mostly to be focused more on greening growth than seriously seeking to change the economic growth paradigm and the economic incentives which support it. We talk about bringing incentives down and making government buy green and things like this, but it's all in pursuit of growth. It's not in pursuit of degrowth, that's for sure. And the green economy speaks the language of business and of innovation, which are good. Government regulation, we're all for that. And intervention to initiate green trends, and seeks to involve the participation of all segments of society in adopting new behaviors. So these are all good things. But I think that what we would agree here, that a position for ecological economics is that growth per se is not really what we're after as the main thing, unless, as Herman Daly said in the interview that I took with him in February this year, because I knew he wasn't going to be able to make it to visit us, so I brought a film back with me. And he said the best kind of green growth that could be promoted would be that which green plants do. You know, they absorb sun, they photosynthesize, and they grow, while using only the absolutely necessary amount of nutrients and water that they need to grow. And when they die, they recycle all their green matter back into the humus, at least a good part of it, unless it's burned or otherwise toted away and used for biomass energy or whatever. So why can't we behave like vascular plants? That's an objective for the green economy. And it's not a joke, I don't think. It's a possibility. You know, we think like green plants. It's not clear that the approach as promoted in the UNEP literature, and you know, here I am beating on my supporters, but I think that UNEP needs to and recognizes the kinds of things we do. As Pushwam said yesterday, UNEP really wants to listen to what ISEE has to say, so then we can, and they know we're critical, so let's be critical. It's not clear that this approach responds to the development targets and the objectives of all the parties that are actors in the participatory process that would lead to new behaviors that is represented in the green economy literature, and particularly those in the global south, despite the reference in what's been coming around these days to inclusive wealth. So we have to think about who gets included. But given that there have been the positions adopted so far by the G77 on shared but differentiated responsibilities when we refer to compliance with global targets and reductions, what are the useful contributions that the emerging market countries, and we're talking about the BRICS, including South Africa or South Korea or whatever you decide to put the S to mean, and Turkey and Mexico and probably a few others besides the BRICS themselves. You know, what are the contributions by the emerging economies to the definition of this paradigm, given the fact that these economies are now representing more than 60% or so, I think the numbers that we said yesterday, 60% or something of the total global GDP, and certainly going to be more so in the futures, given the way that the North is plummeting into disaster at a very fast clip. So what, you know, I think that we're in a new context here in Rio Plus 20 than we were in Rio 92, principally because of this shift in the power denomination of you know, who can call the shots maybe from now on. You know, if it's based on inclusive wealth, then so the wealth is going to be more and more coming from the South. So what are the institutional and cultural changes needed for a transition to a sustainable development paradigm in the emerging economies? You know, the crisis that erupted in 2008 that led to this change in the power position led to an opportunity to try to discuss what has become described as a new economy model. That's the new economy that Gus Speth, who is going to be here with Peter Victor, have founded a new society. And so the new society, 20 seconds. I'm getting there. Okay, I'll speed it up. So the new economy, I think, is an important alliance for ISEE, and they're talking about the urgent and immediate need to deny the fixation on economic growth and increased consumption as an end-all and be-all of national economies, as opposed to other considerations for well-being associated with progress, such as social development, equity, and indeed happiness, among other variables. So I'm just going to end saying that these kinds of goals imply continued efforts to reduce poverty and inequality, while at the same time seeking to meet global goals for reduction in greenhouse gases and other baddies. with patients or feedbacks on resilience and adaptive capacity. And so the emerging powers see this transition toward a green economy as implying the need for a specific strategy for inclusive development with low environmental impact. And that's my interpretation, but I think that we now should open up the floor for debate on these terms. Thank you very much.
We might actually have a bit of a debate on this. So we have a few minutes, right, for agreements, disagreements, comments on the presentations. Do keep your interventions brief, 10 seconds each.
Yes, well, I noticed that your all panelists are skirting around, I think, the central issue. And it came out, of course, at the plenary session yesterday, when there was discussion about the issue of entropy and the issue of Georgescu Rogan's approach to the economy, and it was agreed that this is the direction we must be going. Secondly, and I thought this was very interesting, one of the panelists suggested that we should be teaching thermodynamics in the economics departments of all the universities. So there seems to be here an issue that is so deep in our ecological economics, but we don't seem to do very much research in this area. And I noted that the whole program of this meeting here, there was only one mention in entropy about entropy in all the papers. So I was wondering, where is this research that we require to deal with the central issue of ecological economics, which is in fact entropy production?
I'm David Barkin from Mexico. I note with some bewilderment the way in which the history of this organization is talked about, but I simply would invite the panelists to comment on the fact that Georgescu Rogan declined to become a founding member of ISEE. Georgescu Rogan declined to be on the editorial board of the journal and declined to participate in many of the original activities of this organization, calling stationary growth and sustainability, his words, snake oil. I would think that some 20 years later, it is perhaps time once again, in the same light that the previous commentator made the comment on entropy, that we think about what is it that some of the original thinkers that led to the formation of this organization, but are not here and have not participated, because of principal disagreements with the way in which some of the original contributors and many of the present participants in ISEE are using and continue to use the market and neoclassical economic principles as a way of trying to understand and solve problems which those very instruments and institutions have created.
My name is Volker Mauhofer. Thank you for the hand. I'm from United Nations University, and I have a short question to all the four panelists. If you would meet Achim Steiner, the General Secretary of UNEP, tomorrow, what would you recommend to him regarding green economy? Thank you.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
I work with Earth Economics. My 10-second question is, what do you think, and this is for all the panelists, what do you think the role of civil society organizations, whether NGOs that are large, like the big international NGOs, or ourselves, like smaller outfits, what do you think is the role that we should play as we move forward? How can we better help position the messaging of the society?
I'm Sharad Lele from A3 in Bangalore. My question to Joan and also John, picking on sort of a common theme that they touched upon, which was, Joan said, what is it that gives the power for somebody to impose one particular language of valuation, such as monetary valuation in particular. And John asked the question, what are those not proximate but ultimate causes of our current predicament? And I was thinking that sort of the common question across both of them really is, what is that ultimate cause which gives the power for somebody to impose a particular language? And is imposing a language one of the issues? And what are the other issues that John is referring to? I think as an ecological economics community after 20 years, we need both some commonality of how we define sound environmentalism. We've already seen flavors of that. Green, but also red, also blue, also white. Because there is this constant feeling that if we just use green, if we just use sustainability as our organizing normative concern, we're not addressing the whole set of concerns. And similarly, what are the sort of broader set of causes that we can think of to bring about some amount of closure on our the way we approach this issue?
Well, I mean, this was you asked what we would recommend to the head of the UN or UNEP? Only UNEP. Achim Steiner, whom I know. Well, I would recommend him to read George Reagan and the entropy law and the economic process, which we have read, all of us in this table, and John Gowdy was a student of George Reagan, and I met him at least for 1 week once in Barcelona. He was there. And when I was writing my book, Ecological Economics, this correspondence has been published by now because it's in the archive of George Reagan. So some of us at the origins of ecological economics, clearly Herman Daly, who was a student of George Reagan, were very directly influenced by the entropy law and the economic process. But I think that Achim Steiner perhaps has not read it yet. And this is why there is so much emphasis, I think, on environmental services, on the funds producing flows, and much less on the stocks producing exhaustible resources, and the fact that energy cannot be, energy from the fossil fuels is used and is never used again. It's not recycled, isn't it? Nor is recycled the energy from the sun, but the energy from the sun comes every day and is going to do so for some millions of years. So this is the idea why even a non-growing economy, as I explained, is not sustainable. And this is what George Reagan disagreed slightly, but disagreed with Herman Daly when Herman Daly was talking about the steady state. He said we need decroissance, degrowth, but of course not degrowth 100%, which would be absurd, isn't it? Even in California at the time, some degrowth and I think that all this, well, is very much in the origin of ecological economics. The snake oil was not applied to the steady state. The snake oil, using George Reagan's American way of expression, which is strange for a Romanian, but snake oil he applied to sustainable development. And on this we have agreed, many of us in ecological economics from the beginning. Robert Gould and Herman Daly in 1988 already said sustainable development seems to be an oxymoron, a contradiction, because development is believed to be growth, isn't it? Of course, not everybody thinks alike, fortunately, and this is, after all, a scientific society. It's not a political body. And in a scientific society, there are people who think, provided they think coherently and they publish and they are honest in their arguments, of course, everybody is welcome. But I think that the origins of ecological economics are very clear, and of course there are, as in every society, some personal difficulties and so on. But thank you for reminding us of the importance of the entropy law and the economic process. But I mean, you are preaching to the converted anyway. So that's what I wanted to. Okay. There was a question on valuation languages, but I'm going to pass the word because I don't want. We haven't got much time.
Yeah, let me just make a quick comment to Sharid's remark. I was actually had the good fortune of being a student of Cherchesky-Roshan's. He wasn't my PhD advisor, fortunately, or I probably wouldn't be here. But he stressed the fact in entropy and bioeconomics that humans are a biological species. We're subject to the same biophysical laws as any other species. And I think the biggest problem for humans is not realizing that we're not different. I mean, it's a problem for me, it's a problem for, even for an enlightened audience like this. I mean, it's like Copernicus didn't matter, Darwin didn't matter, and so on. I mean, our species is going through the same processes that many other species have gone through, overshoot, collapse, and so on. The problem is now we're a single species for the whole planet, and if we collapse the whole planet, there's no place else to go. And so we somehow have to realize that we're subject to these evolutionary forces driving economic growth, and we need to be different. We need to get control of it.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, well, I was not a student of Nicholas Georgescu-Reagan, but what I helped to set up and found an organization here in Brazil called ECO, which espouses very strongly to the entropy law and the economic process, but then takes that within the context of where Brazil and where our contributions can make some kind of a dent in the way policy might move in Brazil, where we work in a direction which can absorb this kind of the conceptual foundations, but without necessarily having to buy into all the theoretical constructs. So that I think that we need to move on and be practical. And I don't say that we should absorb and adopt a market-oriented mentality because of that. That's not the direction that we're taking. We've never taken that. But we can maintain a critical attitude toward the mainstream economy without necessarily having to beat on one note, as Tom Jobim has said in his famous Bossa Nova. You don't have to just play the one note to get the tone across. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I thought as a woman I should actually get the last word. So I'll say a couple of things. One is, Sharid Lily's question. Long time ago when we're talking about the Green Revolution and not worrying about how much water and fertilizer and pesticide we were using to grow our food in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a question that was asked in a famous article by Terry Byers, a Marxist, will the Green Revolution turn red? And it was, of course, a reminder of inequalities. So I think it is a good reminder to go back to the primary colors. Will green growth turn red? And it might, unless we also, of course, take into account all the other concerns of poverty, equity. And maybe we're putting all of this in one box. But as Joan keeps reminding us, there are conflicts, and as I keep reminding, there is also cooperation. So in a sense, I think what we are grappling with is how do we, take all these primary colors and come up with shades, which can bring things together, because we don't have to stick with red, green, blue, and white. I mean, there are in-betweens, and those are the challenges of trying to find solutions which provide different mixes for particular contexts. On that one provocative idea that people are absent, founding fathers are absent, I just wanted to say, well, earlier today we had this discussion, feminist economics and ecological economics, can the twain meet? There were founding fathers of one, there are founding mothers of feminist economics. And I think, disciplines and thinking moves forward, and somewhere the founding fathers and founding mothers need to meet. And this is one rich area of two significant aspects of the discipline actually questioning the mainstream. And I just wanted to end with that, that there are directions in which we are moving forward, and that's not a bad thing. And I'm sure the founding fathers never intended that we only stick with particular sets of ideas and not move forward. So I know you might disagree or agree with it, but I'm not giving you time to answer me. So thank you very much, and welcome back tomorrow.